Hello and welcome to the Financial Modelling Summit. My name's Danielle Stein Fairhurst and I'm very excited to be here to such an amazing event. So my topic today is on inheriting a financial model, and it's a topic that's very close to my heart. I'm a financial modelling specialist, so financial modelling is my world. It's what I live and breathe, and it's pretty much all I've ever done. I have written a couple of books about financial modelling. I'm an approved training provider for the Financial Modelling Institute. I run a number of, now virtual meetup groups where we get together and talk about financial modelling, of course. And fairly recently, I became a Microsoft MVP, which was a very big honour. So the reason that I wanted to talk about this topic today, inheriting a financial model, is because I think it's a topic that a lot of us struggle with. And I was actually going through, I've been asked to revise the financial modelling in Excel for Dummies book recently. And as I was going through it, I realised there was a lot of stuff that standard Excel can do for you. So that's why I wanted to cover this topic, because I find that one of my, as a consultant, so I go into organizations and build financial models, and what I often find is that people very, very rarely will come with a blank spreadsheet or a blank file and say, okay, I need you to build a financial model from scratch. I would love it if that were to happen, but that very rarely happens. Usually they say, hey, we've got this financial model and it's not working properly. We need to roll it forward for the next month. We need to roll forward the budget for the next year, or I need you to check this financial model. So that is something as financial modelers that we're often having to deal with. So the things that I'd like to cover with you today are what to check for when meeting a model for the first time, being able to break down long and complex formulas, legacy models, so looking at old models that have been around, they've been traipsing around the company for a while, and then we'll also look at some audit tools in standard Excel that you can use to find and correct those errors. So your choices when you are inheriting a model are to start over and build your model from the ground up. That's a really time-consuming option. Or to take the model that you already have and verify and validate the existing model to the extent that you're comfortable to take responsibility for those calculations. So I would definitely say that if you are inheriting a financial model from someone else, so if you have been asked to take over somebody else's model, to use their model and make it your own, I would never trust somebody else's work, and I would never take the outputs of the model at face value. So what you really need to do is to consider which of those options is really going to be the best one for you. It depends how bad the model is, whether you would really start from scratch, because doing that is pretty inefficient and is quite a waste of resources. So unless a model is in really, really bad shape, it's generally more efficient to use what you already have. But I would recommend that you leave no cell untouched during that process of validation and verification. So we know that, if you are taking over somebody else's model, if there's a process that you need to take over and using somebody else's model is part of that, the best case scenario, of course, is that there is some sort of a model handover meeting where you can sit down with the person who's built it, and that person can take you through all the various bits and pieces in the assumptions. But unfortunately, that kind of meeting is rarely practical. Usually the original modeler has left the company or is unavailable. You've generally been thrown in the deep end and you've just got to figure out how the model works on your own. So if you're lucky, a good modeler would have built the model in such a way that it can speak for itself without the need for additional explanation. So it would flow logically, it would have good documentation, some labels, instructions that make it easy to navigate, easy to use, and easy to figure out how to use it. And of course, any model that you build in the future will have these features, but the model that you inherit may or may not be easy to figure out. So in the absence of any training or handover documentation, when you first start using somebody else's model, there's a couple of things that you should look for when you first open up the file. So meeting a model for the first time. Hello model, how are you? If you are going to be using this model, it's probably worth taking a little bit of time to get acquainted with it, because you're probably going to be spending quite a bit of time with this model. And if you're taking responsibility for its outputs, I think you'd want to sort of know a little bit more about the model. So I would recommend that you familiarize yourself with the layout and how it's built. So there's a couple of sort of cursory things initially that you can look at that you should certainly pay attention to initially. So firstly, the formatting, that's your first impression. So looking at the formatting, what does it look like? So get used to the formatting, decide whether you're happy with the formats that they've used, particularly the color scheme, decide if you want to change it. I know that's all sort of a cosmetic things, but that is the first thing that somebody's going to see when they open up the file. Consider, all of the formulas. Are they hard-coded? Is a hard-coded numbers formatted differently to formulas? Think about whether it matches your company colors. Secondly, think about formulas. So are those formulas consistent? Do they contain any hard coding? So we're going to have a look at a couple of ways of how to check for hard coding in the model. Think about the workbook calculation. So most of the time, calculations will happen automatically. So when you change something in the model, the formulas would change automatically as well. But sometimes when the file is very large, or if a modeler likes to control the changes manually, sometimes the calculation might have been set to manual instead of automatic. And I have spent many happy hours auditing a formula and then wondering why the numbers aren't changing, only to discover that there was nothing wrong with the formula at all. The automatic calculation was simply turned off. So I'll just show you how to check for that first of all. So if you come over into Excel and go to the formulas tab, there's a whole lot of formula auditing stuff that we'll go through, but your calculation options are there. You can just check what those are just there. Okay. So also have a look for external links. So considering whether there are links. Sometimes it's necessary to have external links, sometimes not, but you'd like to know whether they're there or not, and also have a look for named ranges. So if you were looking for external links, you would perhaps go to data, go to edit links, and you'll be able to see that there are in fact some external links going on in this file. You could also look at named ranges like that, so you can see all of the names that are there, or you could go into your name manager and you can see a list of all of those named ranges as well, because sometimes these names can harbour all sorts of tricky things in there. So you want to consider those named ranges also. So once you've had a bit of a look at the model and you're sort of happy with how things look, you might want to do a bit more heavy duty good look at the model. So inspect document is a feature that's been in Excel forever. It doesn't really matter what version of Excel you're using. Inspect document has been there for a while, and that will look for a whole lot of things in your model. It does recommend that you save the model before you do it. Generally, I use it just to sort of find components in the model that I perhaps wouldn't have considered. So let's have a look here. If I go into File and then go to Info, and under Check for Issues, just go to Inspect Document there, and we'll say, no, I don't want to save the file. All I want to do is to have a look for all of these different things. So that is going to actually do a review of the model. It's going to look for data model. Have I got pivot tables, scenarios? Have I got hidden names? Hidden rows and columns, worksheets, that sort of thing. So I'll say inspect, and so you can see here that there are comments, okay. There are a whole lot of other, no pivot tables, okay. There are links, so we saw that already. What else? There are hidden worksheets, so that's something that I might not have thought to look for. So there are a whole lot of other things there, so I can go in here and I can unhide And okay, there's some old assumptions in there. Okay, so maybe make sure that they are perhaps not being used. So save a copy of the model, be really brave, delete, go in and delete that extra. I don't think that's being used. Okay, take a quick look. Okay, everything's looking fine. So, all right. Okay, so that's good. So once I've got rid of that, you can then go into info again and go into your inspect document, and you can run another check, inspect, and you can see, okay, well, I'm happy there that everything's looking a little bit tidier. So using inspect document is a way that you can really check for issues, things that you perhaps wouldn't otherwise think of. So what we're going to take a look at now are some of the audit tools. So when you're inheriting a model, there's several factors that you should come to grips with. So you're thinking about the layout, the design, the formatting, the assumptions, the formulas, all of that sort of thing. But of all of those, the formula calculations is probably the most difficult. You can have a model that looks really nice, but if the formulas aren't working properly, then you've really got a problem. So the audit tools are really going to help you to understand a formula, or to fix, or to find problems and to fix problems. Probably the simplest one, the one that I'm sure you've used before, and that's just going into edit mode. So just clicking on a formula, hitting F2 or double click on it, using, can sort of show you visually where the source data is coming from in the cell calculation. Using the color, it will show the color code. So for example, here, I just hit my F2 and you can see that it's picking up numbers from here and let's say from there. So the color coding, you can see the red one is colored red, the blue one's colored blue. So that's probably a very simple method. The next one is using trace precedence and trace dependence. So that, again, you've probably used before. So you can use that to track backwards and forwards throughout the model. So doing that, you would do something like, trace precedence. And if it's on another page, you would just go double click, and that will jump back. Personally, I quite like doing a shortcut version of this, and that is just using a control back square bracket, that one there, so that when I'm in the back square bracket, it's that one there, the square bracket. So control back square bracket will jump back to the first precedent. So that's just like using the trace precedence, and you could go to, it will actually jump to the first one. So control back square bracket, and then control G or F5 and enter will take you back to where you were. So that's using trace precedence and trace dependence. Now, evaluate formula. I've got to admit I don't use evaluate formula a huge amount, but I'm going to show you how it works. So let's say, for example, here you've got this model and you can see all of the way it's been calculated step by step, but somebody's actually done the whole thing in one single cell. So rather than doing it step by step, you could actually do the whole thing in one single cell. And we know from F1, F9 days that the rule of thumb is that a formula should be no longer than your thumb, and that one is definitely a lot longer than your thumb. So if you needed to take that apart, you could have a look at evaluate formula. So evaluate formula will help you to step in and out of the formula and take apart parts of the formula that will, so you can step in and step out. So step in and it will kind of tell you what part of it. Personally, I actually tend to do it manually. So if you highlight part of the formula that makes sense in its own right, and then hit F9, that will actually give you the result. So it will give you the hard-coded value. So you do need to, if you're going to highlight an open bracket, you do need to highlight the closed bracket as well. So highlight F9, and that's going to, so that will kind of also help you to take apart part of the model also. So that's just using a auditing part of the formula manually. So the next thing we'll take a look at is using the error checking tools, or the and also the background error checking. So to do that, we just go into here and hit error checking. Now there's no error, there should be no errors on there, but let's say if there was an error, so let's say here, if I was to say, let's say that profit is a 0 and that's giving me a div 0. So if I hit error checking, that's going to find errors. And I mean, you should see the errors straight away, but if you've got a really big model and you perhaps don't, you're worried that you might not find the errors, that can help. The other thing you'll notice that it actually comes up with a little green triangle in the corner. That's kind of helpful. You can go into your options in Excel, go into your formulas, and you can actually get rid of that if you don't want to have that, or if you can turn that off and on. So let's get rid of that error there. Okay. So that was error checking. Yes, and show formulas. Show formulas can really help if you are worried about somebody entering. If you want to be able to actually see the formulas. So that's just here on show formulas. So show, hide like that. And you can actually use the your shortcut for that is the control and the little tilde thing, which is just next to the 1 on most keyboards. So that shortcut can toggle backwards and forwards. And that will probably be most helpful if somebody's put in a hard-coded number, because we all know that you shouldn't type hard-coded numbers into formulas, but sometimes people do, and you want to check if anybody's done that. So that was show formulas. The next thing I wanted to show was using the watch window or the camera tool. So that's another little audit tool that you might like to use. So let's have a look at the watch window first of all. So let's say, you grab part of the model that you want to watch, that you want to keep an eye on. So you can go here into the watch window, and you can see I've already popped in a couple of things there that I want to watch, and you can add the watch there, and then I can go over to here and I can say, well, if I were to change that this cell to 660, you can see that the numbers are changing, and you can see that in the watch window. Similarly, the camera tool works in a similar way. It's perhaps just a little bit fancier. Now, the camera tool is quite tricky to find. Now, I popped it up here in my quick access toolbar. You probably, if you haven't used it recently, it's probably not there, and it's actually not something that appears in the ribbon. So what you need to do is go to Customize Quick Access Toolbar, go into More Commands, and it's actually quite hidden quite well. It's not even under Popular. If you look at commands not in the ribbon, and you can find it just in here. So the camera tool, you can grab that and you can move that onto your quick access toolbar. You can customize part of the ribbon as well. So you can just grab your camera tool, and you can say, I want to just, so you could highlight that and say, that's okay, let's say I want to have a look at those 3 cells there. That's what I want to keep an eye on, and hit my camera tool. There we go. And let's say I want to pop my camera over there. So as I change my assumptions, you can see the camera tool in the same way that the watch window works. You can see, you can keep an eye on what the model is doing. So lastly, the find and select. Find and select is quite a cool little feature that you might not have realized was there. It's just there on the Home tab, and it's just a quick way of finding things that you may not realize are there. Perfect for auditing and inheriting somebody else's model. So you can go in and find formulas. So just don't select something the way I've got there and say find the formulas. That is going to select and find all of the formulas throughout the sheet. You could also ask it to find all of your constants. So that's basically what's not a formula. What else can it find? Conditional formatting, because you might realize people love to put, sometimes conditional formatting, you can get multiple rules all over the place. So you can just check whether there's some conditional formatting. So, you can see there that I've actually applied some conditional formatting there. I'd forgotten that I'd done that. So there you go. That can show that there's conditional formatting. So as a model user, if this is your model, you want to know that there is some conditional formatting in there. Let's have a look. We look for data validations. I don't think there's any on there. Let's go to the assumptions now and see what we can find. Let's go in and find formulas. Okay, there's just one formula there. Okay, so that's an external link. So we go into finding notes. Okay, so there's a note. Okay, so, I might have missed that. So you can see that it excludes public holidays. All right, great. Let's see what else. And maybe data validation. Okay, because it's quite hard to see that a data validation has been applied to that. So you can go into your data validation and you can see that the modeler has actually added a data validation there that's going to restrict what people put in there. So if somebody tries to put in a TBA, it won't allow them. Of course, you'll see that straight away. But if this is an inherited model, you probably would like to know that there is some data validation in there also. So all of those tools that we've talked about, these are all standard within, Excel as it comes. None of them are really specific to Excel for Microsoft 365. So they're not 365 features. They've been there all the time. There are quite a few add-in tools that you can use. There's tons and tons of add-in software that you can buy. I know that Spreadsheet Detective is a sponsor of the Financial Modelling Summit. So a shout out to the Spreadsheet Detective. That is a great tool that you can check out. There's lots of add-in tools that you can purchase. Actually, I believe that there's a free trial for Spreadsheet Detective available as well as some of the other ones. I'm a trainer and I'm always teaching people how to use Excel for the purpose of financial modelling. So I tend to just use the features that are standard and that are already available in Excel. So you'll notice that I don't have a lot of add-ins across the top. In our virtual meetups, I'm always really interested to see what add-ins people have got on their Excel. So that's always an interesting thing to see. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about a financial model audit. So, because remember that what we've been talking about so far is using the audit tool. So we're inheriting somebody else's model and then using these Excel audit tools to take a look and to take apart their financial model. So remember that using these audit tools to look at somebody else's model or inheriting a model is not the same as performing a formal financial model audit. So an audit is a really detailed process in which an auditing team, usually a third party, somebody who's not been involved in the model build at all, they take the model apart and check it meticulously cell by cell for errors. So if the bank were lending you money based on the results of the financial model, one of the conditions of the loan might be, or usually would be, that the model be audited to make sure that the results can be relied upon. And getting a model professionally audited can be an incredibly expensive undertaking, but it's really the only way to make sure, to be absolutely sure that there are no errors. So you should note that it's a little bit confusing. People think that some people get confused between a financial model audit and a financial audit where you're actually auditing the accounts. It's quite a different thing. So sometimes we call it a model review to save confusion. One of my pet peeves when you inherit a model is redundant assumptions. So assumptions that are not actually being used in the model. And this is a common problem with financial models, particularly with legacy models that have been around for a long time and they've been passed on from one staff member to another. So sometimes the inputs and assumptions are not actually being used in the model's calculations. And this often happens when the modeler uses source information. They don't realize that it's already been put in as an assumption. And so then they go in and recreate it. So you're creating a duplicate set of assumptions. So and often as the model evolves, sometimes parts of the calculations are deleted. And so therefore the assumptions that fed into these calculations are still there. We don't realize that you don't need those anymore. So the way you can get rid of that, and when you're inheriting a model, you should try to really remove any redundant assumptions, because it's really bad, a poor practice if somebody's merely changing assumptions away and they're not actually driving anything. So you really should make sure that your model does not have any redundant assumptions in there. So let's have a look at how you might get rid of that. So, if we were to use so looking at our assumptions tab here, we can go to trace dependence. You can see that something's actually using that. Let's have a look. So we can see here annual increase in month 4. So you can see that that one's being used. But then we've got 4% again there. So let's have a look at that one. So you can see that that's not actually being used. So what I would say is remove it completely like that. Just get rid of the entire, save a copy first before you make any major changes like this. Go into here. Okay, look, okay, everything looks good. All right, great. So we can continue. Make sure that you delete the entire row or just remove it entirely. Don't just go in and delete it like that or clear the cells. That's not a great idea because it might just be it will just clear it to 0 and then something might be linking to it. You want to actually force it to create an error if that happens. So you don't want it to go to 0. So one technique, though, that you can use if you're worried about redundant cells in your model, if you know that there's a lot of things in there that you don't need, is go to your output page, change everything to a different color, like change maybe all the background to red or something, and then go through and trace from your assumptions, go to your source data and trace back and see what it's being used. And as you validate it, change that color back to white or whatever color scheme you're using. And then when you finish tracing back all of your assumptions, you can see that some of those are not being used at all. And then that will also help you to validate whether there's any redundant assumptions or anything that's not being used in the model. So because sometimes with formula auditing, with the trace precedence and the trace dependence, there's a couple of formulas that you might use that perhaps don't work with trace precedence and trace dependence. So for example, there's indirect or offset. If something is linking to an indirect or an offset, or even with array for data tables as well, that can perhaps the trace precedence or trace dependence don't work. So it is possible sometimes that the trace dependence will tell you that there's nothing depending on the cell, but perhaps there is. So it's not a bad idea to test that. So having these error checks or having these sorts of errors in your model. I know it's a bit scary to see errors like this in your model. People freak out when they see these Excel errors. These errors are your friend. I would encourage you to embrace the idea of having errors in your model. I would much rather see an error that looks like this than to see a number that looks like it's right when in fact it's completely wrong. So you'd be grateful when you see an Excel error like this because it gives you a chance to find it and to fix it. It is absolutely terrifying, the possibility that there could be an error in your model and you don't see it. So having a number that's wrong, it's the thing that keeps the modeler up at night. So seeing errors like this, the first one is my favorite error because it's not really an error. It really just means that your columns are not wide enough. So that's not a problem. Div 0, hash NA, name, those are all sort of fairly, not too bad, those errors. Refs are pretty horrible. Ref means that you have deleted a cell that it refers to a cell that no longer exists. So that's pretty hard to fix. Using the value is not too bad. The spill is one of the new errors. So if you're using 365 and you're using an array formula or a dynamic array and there's something obstructing the array, you'll get a spill error. So that's a new error that you might have noticed. And then we come to circular references. Circular references are pretty awful. So the best way to remove a circular reference is to hunt it down and to kill it. So you need to, let's say, for example, here, if I were to create a circular reference, if I say that word linking to, oh no, we've got a circular reference. That's really bad. So you can see there that it's coming up with circular reference down the bottom left-hand corner. So if I go here and I open up the model, I go, oh no, where's my circular reference? I can't find it anywhere. So the easiest way to hunt down a circular reference is to go in here, go to circular references, and that will help you to find the circular reference. It will help you to locate the circular reference. It will not help you to fix it. You're going to have to figure that out for yourself. So circular references are pretty nasty. So you need to, that was a pretty simple example, which I'll just fix. And there we go. My model is back to its former glory. So yeah, circular references are pretty nasty. You really don't want to have a circular reference in a model. I know that it's a bit of a bone of contention amongst a lot of financial modelers that they like to put, or they insist that you do need to enable iterative calculations in a financial model, and that will allow a circular reference. In my opinion, it's a bad idea, but the situation might arise when you're doing three-way models, a P&L, cash flow, balance sheet, and your P&L is going to drive your cash is going to drive your borrowing is going to drive your debt, your interest on your debt, your interest is going to drive is an input for your P&L is going to drive your cash is going to drive your debt is going to drive your interest is going to drive your P&L, and so you end up with this circular reference. And so what a lot of modelers will do will actually base your interest calculations on the average of the opening and the closing balance of your cash flow. That is perhaps more accurate, but it's going to give you a circular reference. And if you enable iterative calculations, it's going to allow that circular reference. It's also going to allow all sorts of other crazy things and other circular references to happen. And it's pretty much a bad idea. So in my world, in my opinion, I know some modelers don't agree with that. You need to hunt down and you need to kill a circular reference. So do not have a circular reference in a financial model. So lastly, sharing your work. So when you have spent a lot of time building your financial model, you take a lot of pride in your work. You want to own the entire model. You're worried that somebody else might mess things up, and so you want to keep the model to yourself. And your instinct is to do that because you don't want anybody messing up your beautiful work. That sort of approach does not work very well in a collaborative corporate environment. Modeling should be a team effort. You should build models in such a way that others can understand, they can edit, they can use, they can interpret the results of your financial model. You really should be focusing on becoming a good financial modeler, and a good financial modeler knows how to build a model that others can easily follow. As a user, however, you don't always know where the model has come from, and so hopefully some of these tools will help you to understand how the model has been built, and the tools will help you to take apart, validate and verify the models that you've inherited, so that you can go ahead, have those models, make them your own and use them with confidence. So just as a recap, what we have talked about today is what to check for when you are meeting a model for the first time, breaking down long and complex formulas in those legacy models that you might inherit. And we also took a look at the audit tools in standard Excel to find and correct those errors. So my name is Danielle Stein Fairhurst, and I would love to stay in touch with you. So I hope this has been helpful to you, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.